It is no wonder that the earliest human beings who arrived in Australia 50,000 years ago must have doubted every step they took to get there. As we see it, right now the modern Australia is deadly, and it is. But we are in the domesticized version, the safe version. Suppose we had a continent on which crocodiles galloped along on the land like racehorses, on which monitor lizards were larger than the saltwater crocodiles, and on which even the herbivores were able to pulverize your bones. Australia is today referred to as the land of hope. Back then, it was the country of nope. Like the video to help it reach others. If you want more journeys into the unknown, subscribe. The land crocodile. Imagine the scenario. You are strolling in prehistoric Australia and you hear something on the bush. Fast, getting closer. You round the corner and there is the unmistakable figure of a crocodile. But it's not in the water. It's running straight at you, on land, at full sprint. Meet Quinkana, the earth-dwelling crocodile that violated all the rules that the crocodiles were expected to abide by. This was not a remote relative of the crocodile or an evolutionary abomination, but a true crocodilian who found water dispensable. Quinkana was among the apex predators in Australia in the Pleistocene, and it resembled your worst nightmare in person. Although it bore a lot of characteristics to the modern crocodiles, it required a completely new classification of its own because of the bizarre skull structure and the monster of specificity. The most terrifying thing about Quinkana were its legs, which were abnormally long in any crocodilian and which were intended to hold the huge body of the creature in the air. And this is where it becomes worse. There is a possibility that those legs might be sprinting. And we are talking of a land predator 10 feet long, 440 pounds, and capable of running you down. There are even specimens that became even bigger, reaching 20 feet in length, and they seemed like monsters. But the legs weren't the scariest part. Open its mouth and you'd see something that belonged in Jurassic Park, ziphidont teeth. These weren't the crushing, holding teeth of modern crocodiles. They were blade-like, heavily serrated and compressed, identical to what you'd find in the mouth of a theropod dinosaur like Velociraptor. Each bite didn't just grab, it sliced clean through flesh and muscle like a surgical knife. The nightmare is increased. Even the jump into the water could not help. It is indicated that Quinkana was a successful swimmer even though he was a land-based animal. It was the supreme land and water prehistoric Australian predator. Except it wasn't. There was something still worse on the shadows. In case there was no land-sprinting dinosaur-toothed crocodile as the apex predator, what then could be less good than that? The solution is so huge, so poisonous, that Quinkana was forced to look over his back. The venomous giant. Quinkana might have been terrifying, but it was not the king of prehistoric Australia. Such was the name of the biggest terrestrial lizard that has ever trod the ground. Megalania, which is today referred to scientifically as Varanus priscus. Megalania is translated as great roamer, however that is mild. This was not a large lizard, this was a monster that changed the meaning of big. The precise size of it is a matter of endless argument among paleontologists, but even the lowest estimates are nightmare fuel. Megalania at least was 11 feet in length and weighed 348 pounds. And that is a lizard all the size of a sea lion and weighs as much as a reindeer. But those are the babies. In any case, on the largest estimates, limited to fragmentary remains, Megalania is likely to be 26 feet in length, as long a body as the longest known anaconda, but as many as 8.5 times heavier because of his powerful muscular frame. Maximum estimated weight, 2 tons. That's heavier than most cars. Megalania would be frightening on its own just because of the size, but that was not all. Similar to its modern monitor lizard siblings, Megalania had razor-sharp, recurved teeth, which were aimed at ensuring the prey has the greatest resistance. It had very strong legs and sharp claws that had the potential of taking down animals that were many times its size. And then there's the venom. All living monitor lizards are venomous, and Megalania likely was too. But this wasn't just any venom, it was an anticoagulant, preventing blood from clotting. Like its closest living relative, the Komodo dragon, Megalania probably employed a horrifying hunting strategy. Bite once, retreat, and let the poison do the work. Even if you escaped the initial attack, you were doomed. The wound would never stop bleeding, leading to shock, infection, and death. Megalania was basically a 2-ton venomous land-prowling dragon. If you had the misfortune of encountering one in prehistoric Australia, your survival chances were essentially zero. Unless, of course, you were afraid of snakes. In that case, your worst nightmare had a different name, As if venomous dragon lizards weren't enough, prehistoric Australia had another surprise, a serpent so massive and primitive that it hunted in ways modern snakes abandoned millions of years ago. The primitive serpent. The name Wanambi might sound gentle, even poetic. It's not. It belonged to one of the most unsettling predators in prehistoric Australia, a giant serpent that was unlike anything slithering around today. Wanambi belonged to the Madsoidae family, an extinct group of snakes characterized by primitive, inflexible jaws and truly gigantic sizes. While Wanambi didn't quite match the length of today's longest snakes, it came awfully close, with larger specimens reaching 20 feet, equivalent to a very large Burmese python. Breaking with Australian tradition, Wanambi wasn't venomous. But don't celebrate yet. What it lacked in venom, it made up for in sheer horror. Like modern constrictors, Wanambi likely ambushed prey near water sources, striking with lightning speed before coiling around its victim. The constriction would tighten until blood couldn't reach the brain or heart, rendering the animal unconscious. Standard snake procedure, right? That's where things took a dark turn. Unlike modern pythons and anacondas, Wanambi had a smaller, inflexible head. It couldn't unhinge its jaw to swallow large prey whole. So what did it do instead? It tore its prey apart. Using its sharp teeth and incredibly powerful body, Wanambi would rip chunks off its victims, sometimes disemboweling them in the process. Suppose you were a snake that was 20 feet long and that you lost consciousness, and that, had you somehow still known it, you were torn off bit by bit. This wasn't a quick death. This was a process of dissection by a savage killing machine that had not yet developed the mercy of swallowing up its prey in whole. In the case of the early humans who arrived in Australia, it is possible that death by Wanambi was more frequent than the meetings with Megalania or Quincana. The ambushing behavior of the snake in and around the water, where man would have to go at least, made it constantly alive and present. And as long as there are reptilian horrors that rule the earth, you may ask yourself, how did any mammal make it? The response is inhuman. They turned into monsters like all. The marsupial. When the territory was conquered by reptilian nightmares, mammals had two options: become something as frightening or go extinct. The marsupial lion, or rather the thylacoleo as he was commonly called, selected the former and pursued it to the farthest extreme. One of the records that appear nearly unbelievable is that of the thylacoleo, which had the greatest pound-for-pound bite force of any known mammal ever. A thylacoleo of medium size was capable of biting 2.5 times its size as hard as a lion. These animals averaged approximately the size of a European wild boar, but the largest ones ranged in size with full-grown female lions and tigers. The twist in this also is the fact that thylacoleo was most related to the koala. Why that cute, eucalyptus-munching tree dweller? However, when the koalas are harmless leaf eaters, the marsupial lion was a top-level predator whose mechanism of killing is so efficient that it shames even the present-day large cats. Its secret lay in being skull-shaped. The thylacoleo, like the koala, possessed a smaller brain, but this was an advantage in this case. The smaller size of the brain meant that there was more space to have incredibly thick jaw muscles and wide, well-built bones, which made a biological vice to bend the bones. The bite force was, however, only the start. The teeth of thylacoleo were of no other type than those of the mammal world. Rather than normal dogs, it used to have big incisors that served as long daggers and huge, blade-like premolars that served as biological shears. With those huge jaw muscles, this dental armory made a slaughtering machine of frightening effectiveness. The marsupial lion attacked with the savage method of impaling the prey with the incisors and then cutting the windpipe, the spinal cord, and the major arteries in a single fierce strike with the premolar teeth. Scientists speculate that thylacoleo would take them less than 1 minute to kill big animals. In comparison, an African lion may require 15 minutes or more to accomplish the same task. In the event that the bite was somehow not able to do the job, which it nearly always did, thylacoleo possessed supplementary arms. Both front paws carried one large retractable paw that was mounted on semi-opposable thumbs, and this gave them accurate and devastating hits. These claws also made thylacoleo an excellent climber, possibly dragging massive kills up into trees like modern leopards, navigating caves, and traversing rough terrain with ease. In prehistoric Australia, even the mammals were nightmares. But here's the thing about prehistoric Australia that really drives home how insane it was. You couldn't even feel safe around the herbivores. Don't forget, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode, when even the plant eaters could kill you. In the majority of ecosystems, the safe ones are herbivores, the peaceful grazers, the animals, which you might come anywhere near without being immediately killed. Not in prehistoric Australia. Even the plant eaters in this case became animals that would kill you without the slightest effort. Think of a marsupial, the diprotodon, which is now extinct, its nearest living relative being the cute wombat, which gets into a hole and burrows. There was a certain resemblance between the two. Similar basic body plan, similar overall vibe, with an exception of the diprotodon, which weighed up to 3.85 tons. That is equivalent to the weight of a fully grown Asian elephant. It was a car-sized wombat. Diprotodon was a questionable prey by virtue of that enormous size alone. To attack one would be a pursuit like attempting to suppress an elephant. It can be done, perhaps, but it is likely the final thing you will ever attempt. And another surprise to the Diprotodon was that although it was a strict vegetarian, its bite was devastatingly powerful. The jaw of the Diprotodon had the capacity to produce 11,000 newtons of force at the back of its molars. That is more than sufficient to break the human leg in half. This was not the hunting one, but rather the working one. But in case you threatened one, you might perfectly well use that bite in self-defense. Are you going to picture yourself under the feet of a 3-ton wombat whose jaws are strong enough to splinter your bones? That is prehistoric Australia. Even birds were not an exception to the trend of being supersized. Genyornis, a Dromornithidae, so-called thunderbirds, was 6.5 feet in height and weighed 1/4 of a ton. These large, wingless birds were like the terror birds of other areas, only herbivores. That still did not make them any less threatening. Genyornis was a feathered tank with enormous, massive bones which provided it with great strength and an unbelievable weight. A kick by one of them would be like a hit by a charging linebacker. Suppose he weighed 500 pounds and had talons of a razor. Even the vegetarians in pre-modern Australia could not be fooled around with. Prehistoric Australia wasn't just dangerous, it was a biological arms race where everything evolved to kill or avoid being killed. Modern Australia is deadly, but 50,000 years ago, it was genuinely unsurvivable. Subscribe to explore more prehistoric nightmares that make modern dangers look tame.